Hello again. Michael Pillinger here from NYU School of Medicine, talking about gout for Room Now. Today is Monday. It's the day of late-breaking abstracts at the ACR meeting, and I'd like to talk to you today about the infamous black box warning on febuxostat in the context of late-breaking abstract L01, a report of the so-called FAST trial. Just to remind you, when the FDA initially reviewed the phase 3 trials and approved febuxostat, they noted a non-significant increase in cardiovascular risk. Accordingly, they requested that the sponsors follow up with a trial to further assess risk in a phase 4 study. That trial was called CARES and included about 7,000 patients with gout and cardiovascular disease. Subjects were treated with either allopurinol or febuxostat, and the trial found no difference between the two in terms of its primary composite endpoint of all possible cardiovascular outcomes, basically. But it did find in a secondary outcome a significant increase in cardiovascular and all-cause mortality, small but significant. Accordingly, in 2019, the FDA issued a black box warning highlighting the cardiovascular risk and restricting febuxostat to patients who had failed or who couldn't take allopurinol. While the decision was prudent on the FDA's part, the trial that they based that decision on, CARES, was deeply flawed. Among the issues with CARES are the fact that only about half of the patients actually completed the study, a really low number. Most of the events that were found in the study actually occurred after the study was already over and patients were off the drug. And patients who took aspirin in the study, as high CV risk patients probably ought to do, experienced no increase in mortality in the febuxostat group. And perhaps most importantly, since the study lacked an untreated placebo arm, even if the difference was meaningful, it was impossible to know whether febuxostat actually raised risk or maybe even just lowered it less than allopurinol. Moreover, there were already two large studies that contradicted CARES. The first, by Zheng et al., was a retrospective study of about 100,000 Medicare patients, and it showed no increased febuxostat risk. The second study, the prospective so-called FREED trial, may have had some flaws of its own, but it also found no increased febuxostat risk in about 1,000 patients, not with gout in this case, but with asymptomatic hyperuricemia. But what everyone has been waiting for was a study mandated by the European Medicines Agency, essentially a European equivalent of CARES. And now that study is here, presented by Thomas McDonald and his group. FAST, the febuxostat versus allopurinol streamlined trial, was a prospective, randomized, open-label, blinded endpoint study, a so-called probe study, of about 6,000 patients with gout. Subjects were over 60 and had either cardiac disease or at least one cardiac risk factor. Subjects entering the study had all previously been treated with allopurinol and were now randomized back to allopurinol or to febuxostat after a washout, and then titrated to a urate of less than 6 milligrams per deciliter if they weren't already there. They were then observed for a composite outcome of non-fatal MI, stroke, and cardiovascular death, and the data was assessed in a non-inferior design. So what happened? In contrast to CARES, about 95% of the subjects completed the trial after being followed for a median of 4 years, which was much longer than CARES. Overall, there was no significant difference between the two groups for the primary endpoint of composite outcome, and no significant difference in mortality. In sum, with the exception of CARES, no meaningful study to date has identified an increased risk of cardiovascular events or death when taking febuxostat, and CARES was deeply flawed. Will the FDA reverse its black box warning? Probably not. Should we be using febuxostat as a first-line drug? Probably not, if only for cost reasons. But the ongoing VA Stop Gout trial will give us the first evidence as to whether allopurinol or febuxostat is actually one superior to the other or equivalent. In the meantime, though, when as practitioners we do see the need to prescribe febuxostat, we can all sleep a little easier knowing that FAST and FREED have failed to reproduce the results of CARES. Keep tuning into Room Now for more reports and videos. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.